All right, so everybody who's tuned in, we have talked about economic policy for nearly an hour. We have a couple more things that we're going to get into, and a couple things that I think are very important as well. So we're going to move on from all the economic stuff, and we're going to go ahead and jump into something that I've been wanting to talk about on this podcast for a while, and I brought it up probably since episode 3, and I finally have a chance to bring this up, and that's the Ticketmaster Live Nation lawsuit that was brought up last year, and just the both companies and the monopoly they have, and really just how it impacts artists and fans. So this is an article from the NBC News. I believe this was back in May. Yes, it was. What the Ticketmaster Live Nation lawsuit can mean for fans of live music. Many live music fans likely met the news that the U.S. Justice Department is seeking to break up Ticketmaster and its parent company, Live Nation, with glee. Long the subject of customer or consumer complaints, angst towards the two companies reached a crescendo in 2022 when Bruce Springsteen fans were confronted with the so-called, quote, dynamic pricing, as we brought up before. We're still finding a way to bring it back to dynamic pricing in this podcast, that saw face value ticket costs rise to hundreds of dollars. Later that same year, demand for tickets to Taylor Swift's Eras Tour caused Ticketmaster's website to crash when seats went first on sale. While experts say it will take some time before fans see relief stemming from the DOJ's actions, assuming they are successful, the results should ultimately benefit consumers and artists alike. So the Biden administration is accusing Live Nation of exercising monopoly power, alleging the company controls some 60% of concert promotions at major venues and about 80% of ticketing operations through Ticketmaster figures. Live Nation figures that Live Nation has disputed. Another thing that's important to bring up is, and this goes for sporting tickets as well, of course, with concerts, is there's obviously a lot of other ticketing outlets out there, such as SeatGeek, such as TickPick, numerous Vivid Seats, StubHub. A lot of those that even do end up being resale tickets are originally tickets that were bought through Ticketmaster as well. And that's something I think that a lot of people maybe don't know about, everything that goes on with that. Also, there's the issue of a lot of tickets for bigger concerts or bigger sporting events to be already bought up before it even goes on sale to the general public. Whether that's pre-sale opportunities with people with specific cards, whether it's other opportunities that people get to buy them before they go on sale. A lot of scalpers will collect them, buy those up, and then resale them, sell them back at 200% the price, if not more, sometimes even 300%. And I wanted to talk about, just this issue in general and why I don't feel it's going to get anywhere in terms of actually, positive impact on artists or positive impact on fans. And that's because, and this is from Politico, California lawmakers got ticket freebies as they crack down on Ticketmaster's Taylor Swift debacle. So we'll go ahead and talk about this here. Ticketmaster's troubled handling of Taylor Swift's Eras Tour prompt California lawmakers to spend months cracking down on the ticketing industry while they enjoyed thousands of dollars worth of free tickets themselves from interest groups. One assembly member even appears to have accepted concert tickets to that very same Swift tour, which prompted the effort to dismantle ticketing monopolies following backlash over Ticketmaster's glitch-riddled sales rollout. So there's 66 state assembly members and 120 state lawmakers through their financial disclosures receiving more than $30,000 worth of tickets, whether it was Disneyland, music festivals to see country music stars, San Francisco 49ers seats. And I know as a fan, those tickets are expensive, amongst various other venues or events. You could just see how the system is completely rigged and how these companies try to take advantage of politicians, try to take advantage of politicians and line their pockets. I really do hope that something gets done on this front, but I'm not that positive because at the end of the day, big money is probably going to win the day. I know back in the 90s, Pearl Jam tried to fight this issue and tried to not go through Ticketmaster, and ultimately they lost that battle. I wanted to bring up one final article here, and then I'll go ahead and bring up Dylan. I definitely want to bring you in on this, being an artist yourself. The depth of Live Nation's dominance. The live event industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry that continues to grow every year. One of the key drivers of revenue for the industry is live concerts, especially for the artists who make up the vast majority of their income touring. In 2010, touring made up 82% of artists' income, and by 2022, it has made up roughly 95%. A lot of that is due, I think, to a lot more streaming services out there and artists not having as much control over the music that they publish in terms of a lot of money going to them, because a lot of the companies that are the streaming platforms take some of that revenue as well. Live Live Nation Ticketmaster is the largest entertainment company in the world, dominating almost every corner of live events and more specifically live music industry. Yeah, Dylan, I want to bring you in on this here. Overall, what is your, first off, how if it's something that you've experienced yourself or that you've seen from other artists that you know of, how have you just seen Ticketmaster and Live Nation specifically hurt some of these smaller artists in regards to whether not promoting their shows or them artists not getting opportunities at some of these venues? And ultimately, what do you think can be done to combat this monopoly?
Well, I don't know. For one, I don't know if breaking up Live Nation and Ticketmaster would have a real tangible impact on ticket prices just because of how getting ticket prices set actually works. Like, depending on how high up an artist is, most of the higher up artists in terms of popularity 100% set the prices themselves. So in a way, I do feel like Ticketmaster and Live Nation are being scapegoated a little bit, but at the same time, they do have like management stakes in a majority of well-known artists and promotion. So it's not just the tickets, it's every aspect of the show. And that's where, as a collective, why going to a concert in general is such an expensive experience sometimes. It's the combination of everything as opposed to just the tickets. So if we're thinking about how do we get ticket sales down, it, it's hard to say for sure what the answer would be because there's so many different factors that go into it. For one thing now, artists predominantly make their money off of playing live as opposed to like back in the 80s, like you would tour to promote the record because you're trying to sell records. Whereas now, like that's not a thing. Like if you release a song and it gets streamed, I want to say 1,000 times on Spotify, you're going to get $3 for that. Whereas back in the day, if you had a single that you released and people were buying the single, I think you would get, I don't know for sure, but anywhere from 10 to 20%, probably closer to 10% of that money would go to the band. So with the way it worked before, it would be like, oh, um, if you sell 1 million records at $10 a record, the band would get like $1 million of that. That's not really happening anymore because people don't buy physical records like they used to. It's streaming. And if an album gets streamed 1 million times, let me think, I want to say that's $3,000. So that's significantly less money. So bands aren't making and artists aren't making the money they used to from the record companies, from their sales. So they are having to charge significantly more to try to offset that with their live shows. So that's a really big issue that Ticketmaster and Live Nation don't necessarily have that much to do with. Um, Now, the random additional fees that they do have to do with, but like I think Gabby brought up the whole junk fee thing. I think that's already being addressed to an extent in the hidden fees. And then my area of expertise per se is a little bit closer to the kind of the lower levels of the music business. But in general, I would say it's, I think the rise of streaming has more to do with the rise of ticket prices than anything a particular ticket company is doing.
I'm happy that you did bring up the fact that artists, some of these artists setting prices also plays a huge impact on this front because and I'm going to shout out a podcast that I listened to on Spotify, but your favorite band sucks. They did a good podcast talking about this issue, and one thing that they brought up that I didn't even know about because I'm a fan of them were Radiohead back in I think '07 or '08 released an album basically for free to people, but then they had a lot of people go out and scalp and buy all the tickets before they went out and sailed to the public and essentially rise the prices of the entire tour by 300%. So in reality, they try to parrot that they were doing a good thing and something cool for their fans to where, they'd be able to listen to their music for free. And then in reality, the people that actually wanted to go listen live were the ones that were going to have their pockets hurt, and it really didn't get talked about a lot out there.
Yeah,
But in regards to the issue in general, because I mean, you brought up obviously streaming and how that's played a role in, artists raising their prices. I also wanted to bring up the fact that, there's also a lot of these venues are bought or owned by Live Nation. For
exactly.
example, 88 of the top 100 amphitheaters in the world are located in the United States. And out of those 88, 56 of them are operated by Live Nation, which means Live Nation operates the majority, 64% of the top grossing amphitheaters and venues in the United States. With control of those venues, Live Nation is able to leverage that power to dominate ticketing and other segments of the industry. You also see, I think, that this comes down on merchandise sales as well. There's a lot of things
Yeah.
with that too. So I think that there are certain things that could be done to impact those. I guess two-part question for you, Dylan, on this front. Firstly, in regards to the first thing you were talking about with streaming, and artists having to spend more, obviously that hurts fans. Is there an answer to that? If so, what is that answer? And then regarding Live Nation, what do you think can be done to target that aspect side of things, since they really have a monopoly just over venues in this country?
Excellent questions on both ends. So I think for the non-superstar musician, um, awareness of how the streaming industry works is important because you can make it work for you. It's definitely doable. You can, for one, I think, unless you're a pop star, the idea that you need to get with a record label in order to be successful with releasing music, that's completely false. In fact, it's usually going to be better for you financially if you're independent. Like if you take like my realm is rock music. So if you take one of the few up and coming rock bands that's been doing some stuff, Dirty Honey, they have multiple albums out. They have songs with millions of streams, and they're not signed to a level. And they've said, why would we sign to a label when we can do this ourselves and, you know, keep more of the money, keep the rights to our music and all of that. So I think part of it is going to be, in terms of easing the burden on the artists, is going to be more artists becoming self-sufficient in running their business, because that's what it is. If you're a musician, you're also a business. And the days of getting signed by a major label and having them basically take care of your promotion, that those days are over unless you're a pop star. And then as far as lowering the ticket prices, the other things is there needs to be some strict guidelines on resale and pre-sale, because the idea that there's concerts where more than half of the tickets aren't even made available to the public that's a problem. That's going to drive up the price of tickets for the average person. So if there's less tickets, then the demand's higher, and when people resell them, they can charge more or whatnot. Or if they're using a dynamic pricing type of system, like I noticed you brought up the Springsteen thing, and I don't know the exact details on that, but my basic understanding was they were trying out Ticketmaster's new at the time dynamic pricing systems where the prices would fluctuate based off of demand. And Springsteen hadn't had a tour since 2016. And he is arguably the greatest rock performer of all time. He certainly has the most loyal fan base of any rock star still touring. So, of course, the in the moment demand was going to be insane. So that's why we got those really bizarre surges in his prices in the moment. They did eventually start going back down after the fact, but that type of system where you base it on pure in the man the moment is gonna screw a lot of people over when those tickets first come out,
Yeah,
because
and
if
I
it's
don't want to
someone
interrupt
people
you,
have
but the
been
one thing I want
clamoring
to
to
bring
see.
the one thing I want to bring up on that front, then I'll toss it right back over to you,
Yeah.
is I think the question that some people would have on that front is, okay, so then if you're the artist, obviously, there's the understanding that, there's other things that impact them that hurt them in the industry. But then the question becomes, out of morality, what's the right thing to do? Because a lot of the time when it comes to smaller venues back in the day, you would set one price to get in and it'd be general admission because it would just be floor. Of course, some of these other venues, it's different because you have higher and lower levels. But then the question becomes, is it the right thing to do to charge more for those tickets, or do you keep it at the base price line that you had before and just allow whoever is first come first serve to get in? Of course, that's going to be hard because you have systems crash and a lot of things are online, unlike back in the day when you could actually go and buy tickets from a specific place. But the question becomes, what is the right thing to do on that front if you're the artist?
Yeah. And that's the other thing too, because, you know, even if the artist isn't setting the price exactly, if they're using that dynamic pricing system, they still have to agree to it. So there's that too. And it kind of depends on the system that they're using. It depends because they might be using a system where the artist just gets a flat out guarantee and then the venue sets the pricing. Or it could be just the artist gets uh, agreed upon percentage of ticket sales and they try to do the math as to how do they make a profit if they sell X amount of tickets and all of that. Um, and then the other thing too that I wanted to mention, because a lot of the time, Live Nation, Ticketmaster, they'll try to say, well, we don't actually make money from these service fees. That's mostly the venues. And it's like, yeah, but you own the venue. So yeah, the money is going to you. So, you know, it's if you own the venue and you own the promotion company, you can't just say, oh, well, these we're not actually getting these fees. They're going to X. You own those companies too. So it's like I don't know if bait and switch is the right word, but it's pretty deceptive. So um that's just silly to me that they try to use that argument when the like a vast majority of major venues, especially in the United States, are either owned by or have some kind of contract with Live Nation.
Yeah, and yeah, that's a funny point and great point you brought up there because again, they will try to use that as an excuse, but again, you could turn it right back on them and they won't have anything to say. One other thing I just wanted to mention real quick because we talked a little bit about service fees, and obviously there are some people that are trying to target junk fees on certain areas in this country. Average service fees for a ticket are 27%, according to a 2018 Government Accountability Office report. Before we move on into another issue, Gabby, I wanted to just bring you in on this. What are your thoughts just on this issue and what me and Dylan were talking about in regards to just the issue of the costs for live music nowadays, and how difficult it is for artists, but also how it can hurt fans and impact them?
So I did talk with quite a few of my music friends. Most of them are making money off of their merch rather than anything else at this point in time. However, it's hard to get that merch out when touring is so profit draining. The price that you're getting from these tickets is going straight into funding the tour. And Dylan mentioned like the artist has to agree to play this, but how many venues are actually available for you to play? And at that point, like you have to play by Ticketmaster's rules. Like it's that or nothing. And even when it comes to the streaming, you're no longer getting, 3 cents per every 10 plays. Unless you're in the top, I think it's something like 15% or something stupidly small, And so it's like there's no profit in that either. You're purely going off of like you're going off of merch. If you happen to be able to afford going on tour, you're profiting off of possibly ticket sales. But if Ticketmaster, or even if you do go to a smaller venue, some of these smaller venues have beef for some reason or another when it comes to local or out of town artists. So they might not promote you necessarily, and you might not be making as much sales. Some of these venues are taking a higher profit if you are selling more, or if, again, that beef comes into play. And you're probably making some sort of money off of your Instagram or TikTok if you do have a presence on those, but that's genuinely a lot of work. Like, you look at some of these TikTok people and some of these Instagram people, and it's a full-time freaking job. So the music industry, I don't want to say is dying, because it's genuinely not dying, but there's so many factors that just mid and low tier artists are genuinely being pushed out of being able to spread their music. Because how many times do you go to a concert that you don't know the opener and you end up liking the opener? My most recent concert was Hanabi, and that's a Japanese metal band, and they had this absolutely phenomenal second act with this like band that I completely didn't know, and now I'm like, I love them. It's this huge like Hispanic guy, and he's doing these gutturals, and it's like, it was so good. And I'm like, if I didn't come to this concert, I wouldn't have known about them. And so you kind of look at that, and it's like, you have to be sort of making money off of that. And you're not, because if you're doing well at the touring, how much did that tour cost you? If you're doing well at the merch booth, how much is the venue taking out of your merch sales? Are they taking out of your merch sales? Because not every venue does. And if you do end up with more fans, how far in the hierarchy of Spotify are you? Because that's going to determine if you're even making any money at all. And how many of those people that are listening to you on Spotify are going to bother following you on TikTok or Instagram, because that also determines how much money you're going to be making off of that. And you look at even bigger artists, like you were mentioning the ticket surge and all that other stuff, the bots purchasing and the pre-sales, even somebody as huge as Bad Bunny attempted to sort of take on Ticketmaster and the bots by only allowing people that signed up to purchase tickets. I think it was a couple of weeks prior to tickets going on sale, and that still didn't work. And then when it comes to the pre-sales, it's still an issue when it comes to concert goers. I personally managed to get tickets to Miku Expo, which is highly sought after tickets. I'm sure, I'm not sure if either of you know what Miku is, but extremely, like, for quite a lot of like money, like the lines for these Miku Expos are insane. I was in San Jose, and the line, I got there 5 hours beforehand. The line literally wrapped around 2 blocks. Like, this is the kind of ticket sales that you're getting. And the only reason I got it was because somebody happened to post online, here's the pre-sale like password. And I'm like, and you get situations like that where it's like, this is genuinely the situation where nobody outside of the know would even have a chance to get these tickets unless you waited long enough. Like, I knew this one guy who didn't manage to get the pre-sale, and he's looking at the prices, and it's $400. $400 for a ticket that originally was $80, and that's it's just the concert industry. It's not dying, but I kind of wish that it was, just a little bit. But honestly, if you want to keep like the music industry alive, you have to go to local concerts. And it's so hard to say that because I know that there's so few places that you can go to that the artists are making any money off of. In Sacramento itself, you know, you're looking at the Boardwalk, Harlow's, the Starlit Room, you're looking at the Colony, and like it's unfortunately we lost probably one of the most iconic venues of Holy Diver, but that was also a really good one.
Goldfield Trading
So
Post too.
it's definitely it's a disheartening state that we're in when it comes to the music industry. And you know, I do have a few friends that are involved in it, and they all are seeing the effects, like whether it's personally or whether from people that they know that are higher up in like the music industry.
Yeah.
There's a couple things
yeah.
to tag on to there if I could.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I would say a lot of, I think what you were saying, Gabby, applies more to bands that do original music than say like a covered band or a tribute band or something like that. Like with the merch, especially, like merch,
Yes,
you're
definitely.
absolutely right, is going to be
I will be honest, I have
huge for original bands.
I have no connection with cover bands. I only have connections with originals.
So with the connections with original bands that I do have, you're absolutely right about the merch. Like merch is going to be how you make your money starting out, if that's even viable. Because lots of places, either as an original band, either they're not going to pay you to play, they're going to pay you very little to play, or, and this is the norm in big music cities, it hasn't really come to SAC yet, although I think it will eventually, is basically a pay to play.
Yes, that's in a couple of places. I'm not sure exactly where, but it is.
Now and there are some venues in the SAC area that are really good to artists, like Opera House in Roseville, for example. Like if you're, it's more of a tribute band or cover band kind of place, but I have known a few original bands that have managed to break into there, and they treat their artists fairly there. Or Swabbies on the River in Sacramento also is very fair towards their artists. You mentioned the Boardwalk. The Boardwalk has changed a bit under their new ownership. They're much more geared towards cover bands and tribute bands now. Although I have seen a few original bands there, but it used to be when we were younger, like that was the place if you were either an original punk band or an original metal band. That place was legendary. I mean, they had bands like Pantera there back in the 90s. Like, in fact, I play with musicians now who played at the Boardwalk when it first opened. But as far as the music industry, it's definitely not dying, but it's changing dramatically, and people aren't being told how to play by the new rules. So
yes,
having the education on how it's starting to work now is definitely important. The days of all you have to do is write the songs and play the songs are over. You need to be, you're basically self-employed if you want to be actually making money in music. It's even harder as an original artist. It's a little easier if you're in a cover band or a tribute band because there's always a market for that. But with original bands, especially, you have to be your own publicist, you have to be your own manager, you have to be your own promoter. You have to handle all of the infrastructure yourself if you want to make any money, at least starting out.
Let me just say something right now. I absolutely enjoyed sitting back and learning a ton of stuff that I have never learned before. A lot of things I bring on the show and I try to pull up resources, but nothing beats firsthand experience. Thank you guys so much for that. That was a really good topic there, and I'll probably put this off into a separate part. And again, that's extremely important for anybody who is an artist or anybody out there just to understand the industry a bit more as well. No, that was great, and of course, it's all great to have fellow rock and metal heads on the show as well. Gotta love that too. So before we get going, I did want to just touch on a couple of small things before we get going here. Firstly, and I'll go ahead and share my screen for this one. We do have a little bit more election news that popped up yesterday, and it's very important, and that is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Planning on dropping out of the presidential race. This is from ABC News. Sources tell ABC News that Kennedy plans to endorse Donald Trump, but when asked directly by ABC News if he will be endorsing the former president, Kennedy said, quote, "I will not confirm or deny that. We are not talking about any of that," he said. I think it's important to note that his vice president, I can't remember her name off the top of my head, but she went on a podcast within the last week and basically said, we're exploring the option of either staying in the race or dropping out and endorsing Trump because we don't want, there to be a Harris Walz presidency. I think it's important to note that when Kennedy went into this race, he leaned a little bit more of a Democrat and thought he might take some votes away from Joe Biden, who was in the race. And since then, he's realized, oh, wait, I'm actually taking more votes away from Donald Trump. And that's actually what I wanted to ask you guys. I'm not going to pull up the poll numbers, and I don't have them in front of me, but depending on the state, Kennedy is around 4.5% across the country right now. Some states he's a little bit higher, of course, some he's a little bit lower. And I wanted to ask you guys, ultimately, what do you feel, where do you expect his voters to go? What percentage do you feel will kind of sway in the direction of voting for Donald Trump? And then what does Kamala need to do to stay ahead and retake the lead if that does end up being the case?
I will be honest, the most that I know about Kennedy is the meme of him having worms in his brain. So if he drops out, I am happy for them to be able to retire, hopefully. But genuinely, the stuff that I do actually know about Kennedy is that, yes, a lot of his voters do lean right. And he somehow started out somehow on the left and then floated to the right. So it felt very Trumpian because, when he first started out, he was saying some small democratic ideas, and then he went full-blown far right. So I think a lot of his voters, those that were paying attention to mostly the beginning parts, might fall towards Kamala, but majority of them are probably going to end up falling towards Trump. I think the way that Kamala will be able to get more voters and stay ahead in the polls, say anything about going against Israel. That's all you have to do. Like, she could lie. She lies about other stuff anyways. Like, she could just lie and say, we're going to, discuss with Israel regarding a ceasefire. We're going to do, these sanctions. We're going to do an embargo, anything. Like, anything to do with Gaza, as, we were talking before the show. Democrats allegedly focus on the college-age voter, the young voters, the Gen Z voters, the millennial voters. What these generations and these age groups care about right now is Gaza, free healthcare, and paying back student debt, and being able to live in a house or even an apartment. Like, people aren't even dreaming of owning a house anymore. They're dreaming of living in a structure that's not made out of cardboard or, polypropylene or whatever tents are made out of, So it's simple math, but you're probably not going to see the Democrats do that within the next couple of weeks. Maybe at the very tail end of the election season, but I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon, personally.
I think the main split with a lot of RFK voters are ones that are, very pro-choice, because RFK is a very pro-choice person, but also are very critical when it comes to big pharma and specifically, of course, vaccines, because you see a lot of, more anti-vax rhetoric with him, anti-COVID vax, anti-vax in general when it comes to a lot of things. So I think that you have a lot of people that are maybe more on the left, but are just skeptical when it comes to big pharma. But then on the right, you have a lot of people that were just, I'm not a fan of Donald Trump's rhetoric, and this guy obviously has the family legacy, so I'm going to lean towards this guy. So the main question is, do those people that are care a lot about abortion but aren't as pro big pharma, do they go to Kamala Harris, and do the people that are on the other side, do they go to Donald Trump? I think ultimately, and this is just my thought, and then Dylan, I'll bring you in on this. I think ultimately my thought is the majority, or at least the soft majority of RFK voters are either A, going to vote for another third party candidate, or B, will not vote. I think that's realistically what's probably going to happen. But I do think there's going to be a greater contingent that will probably lean Trump's direction. Maybe say 30% of RFK's voters will go towards Donald Trump, and maybe say 10% go to Kamala Harris. But I think a majority of them, 50 to 60%, will probably just sit out this election. At least that's my thought on that. Dylan, what's your thought on RFK dropping out, and where you think that will go?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to have as big of an impact on the election as some people think, just because, like you said, I also think that a majority of people who would have voted for RFK are either going to, or Robert Kennedy Jr., are either going to vote for um, no one or another third party candidate. Because, I mean, Robert Kennedy Jr. is basically, or was basically, a throwaway vote or a protest vote. So, I mean, I don't think that's going to change much for Kamala or Trump. I also do think his intention in running was to try to shift things in Trump's favor. And I think him dropping out is, like you said, him realizing that his being in the race is no longer doing that. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what happens. I personally would like to see Jill Stein also drop out of the race. Just because, like in 2016, Hillary would have won if Stein had dropped out. And I think the country would be in a much better place today than if Hillary had won in 2016 than Trump, just from a purely how society treats each other standpoint. Because civil discourse basically died because Trump murdered it. So if we want to forget about policy for a second and just talk about how we treat each other, how we talk to each other, things would have been a lot different there. And I think Jill Stein's going to have more impact on this race than Kennedy would have, if that makes sense.
Interesting. I was going to say the timing of this is also very interesting, because, of course, he chooses the day after the Democratic National Convention ends, of course, to have this, to try to shift momentum back in the other direction, of course.
100%.
I definitely want to come back to the point that you were making just now. However, there is one more thing I want to touch on. I think a lot of this will kind of tie together, and that's that one other thing that we've seen come out of the DNC this week is there's obviously been huge pro-Palestine protests that have been going on, and I'll go ahead and share my screen for this one. You've seen the uncommitted delegates that were wanting there to be a Palestinian speaker in the DNC speaking slot, and the Democrats basically refused for that to happen. So I'll go ahead and read this. This is from Axios. Palestinian Americans have not been granted a speaking slot at the DNC despite pleas from pro-Palestinian delegates. Democratic leaders were concerned that a speech addressing the war in Gaza would shake the unity that has been present throughout the event, the Washington Post reported. Let's see, Abbas Alawiya, I'm probably butchering that name, an uncommitted delegate from Michigan and a leader of the uncommitted national movement, said in a video that Harris, President Biden, their respective teams are aware of the uncommitted delegates' request for a Palestinian American speaker at the DNC. They proposed speakers such as Georgia State Rep. Ruwa Rahman, and I'm going to go ahead and bring up something here in a second of hers, Illinois State Representative Abdel Nasser Rashid, and Dr. Tanya Haj Hassan, a pediatric care physician physician who treated patients in Gaza, per the Washington Post. And this comes after the parents of Hirsch Goldberg Poland, an American Israeli hostage being held in Gaza, were invited to speak at the DNC on Wednesday. And look, obviously I'm a person, I've talked on the show many times, I'm pro, I'm very much pro ceasefire, but I also understand that, like, yes, obviously they're being hostages, and what happened to all of the innocent civilians on October 7th, absolute tragedy, absolutely horrible. And so them speaking, I have no issue with it. But again, to only pretend that there is suffering on one side is ignoring everything that has happened ever since that day now for 10 months. So I wanted to bring up here, and I'm going to go ahead and you guys will see me type this in. I wanted to see exactly her speech because I saw earlier on X what her speech was. So go ahead and bear with me. Here it is right here, Mother Jones. Sorry, everybody. I'm pulling this up last minute because it came into my mind. Let me see here. Yeah, this is the text of Ronman's speech of what it was going to be. I'll go ahead and read a couple of graphs of this, and then everybody else is more than welcome to pull up the rest of this. My name is Ruwa Rahman, and I'm honored to be the first Palestinian elected to public office in the great state of Georgia. And the first Palestinian to ever speak at the DNC. My story begins in a small village near Jerusalem called Suba, where my dad's family is from. Sorry, I'm fighting my screen here. My mom's roots trace back to Al Khalil, or Hebron. My parents, born in Jordan, brought us to Georgia when I was 8, where I now live with my wonderful husband and our sweet pets. Growing up, my grandfather and I shared a special bond. He was my partner in mischief, whether it was sneaking me sweets from the bodega or slipping a $20 bill into my pocket with a familiar wink and smile. He was my rock, but he passed away a few years ago, never seeing Suba or any part of Palestine again. Not a day goes by that I don't miss him. I'm going to skip a few graphs, and I want to get to the last graph here, which is the most important. Where are we? Yes. Let's commit to each other to electing Vice President Harris and defeating Donald Trump, who uses my identity as a Palestinian as a slur. Let's fight for the policies long overdue, from restoring access to abortions to ensuring a living wage to demanding an end to a reckless war and a ceasefire in Gaza. The fights for an America that belongs to all of us, Black, brown, and white, Jews and Palestinians, all of us, like my grandfather taught me, together. So I think that the reason I want to bring this up is the fact that this was kind of a test for the Democrats. This was a test that, even though you might not support the policies that lead to a ceasefire or lead to some positivity on this issue, are we at least going to send somebody up there to at least speak and talk about the suffering that's going on? And what's crazy about this speech not being allowed in is this person was still going to support Kamala Harris and say, hey, we believe that, she should still be the president. We believe that, she is still the person that we should all be fighting for. But because the Democrats didn't even allow that, and there were sit-ins outside of the United Center, there were armed police outside of it, I saw earlier today. You've seen now that I think it was the Muslim woman for Harris Walls has completely backed out and said, we're no longer supporting her. We ain't supporting her. And the thing that's going to be very interesting about this is how this is going to impact some of those swing states like Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. I'll talk about this when I do my whole prediction next week, but Pennsylvania, there's a lot more support out there for a ceasefire and for an embargo, and that would get her a lot more votes than not doing that. So it's a horrible just political move, I think, from Harris, and it's going to see a lot more voters go towards people like Jill Stein or go towards other third-party candidates out there. So, and it's partially in a response, and then I'll let you respond to what I'm going to say in the whole issue in general. Is it a throwaway vote in respect to knowing that that person is not going to get elected? Yes. Is it understandable from the respect of knowing that we don't even have a candidate that is going to allow somebody on stage to speak about these issues, while also understanding that President Trump is horrible on this issue too, and will let Israel do whatever they want? There was talk earlier this week that he nuked the idea of there being a ceasefire, telling Netanyahu, don't accept this deal because we don't want the Democrats to look good. He's horrible as well. But the fact the Democrats won't even do anything to combat that shows a lot of people that maybe they're not fighters for them, so they're going towards other options. The question then becomes, how do you bring those people back on the side without demonizing them? So I guess my question, I'll go ahead and start with you, Dylan, on this, and then Gabby, we could talk a little bit about this too.
I
Overall, go ahead.
I do have to go right now.
Okay.
So
You can make
I
a
guess
point if you want to real quick, and then I'll pass it over to Dylan, and then I'll let you go if you want.
all that I have to say really is understanding Kamala and in general the Democratic Party's stance when it comes to how much they love APAC money. It was a no shot that any Palestinian, even if they would have never brought up Palestine, even if they would have never brought up Gaza, like there's no chance that they would have ever let a Palestinian speak on the DNC, simply because if they did, you would be seeing that APAC money start heading towards the Republicans. And it already does, but it would be going that way even more in droves than it already does. But
cool. Well, thank you so much, Gabby, for coming on. I greatly appreciate all of your, analysis and talking about all this stuff. And it really, you did such a great job with all this, and I really appreciate you spending some time this evening. Thank you so much.
thank you for having me on.
Of course.
And I will see you later.
All right.
Bye.
Take care, Gabby. Okay, so sorry, Dylan, going ahead and going back to you on that front. Overall, since, the Democrats didn't allow this to happen, what do they need to do to fight back to where they can at least win this battle on rhetoric to draw these voters away from voting third party, which would inevitably be catastrophic for them?
Well, I'll say before I answer that, I do want to say this is the type of thing the Democratic Party does that drives me insane. And I think is why a lot of, especially younger voters, are just not jumping on that ship. Is I think that was a decision made for the wrong reasons. I think that decision was made out of fear. I think their strategists were thinking, well, the right has put so much energy into framing any notion of support for Palestine as basically supporting terrorism or supporting terrorists, that they were afraid that to even have a Palestinian speaker there, the right would use that as a way to attack them, like, oh, Kamala supports terrorism. And that kind of thing just, like I said, it just drives me crazy because I think the Democratic Party, in terms of their strategy, has a tendency to make decisions more out of fear of how the right is going to attack them for it than out of whether or not it's the right decision to make. And that is a huge turnoff for a lot of voters of our generation specifically.
It's because in many ways, those ideas are very reactionary themselves.
Yeah. So in terms of what she can do to undo that damage, for one, I think you said that her camp claimed that they weren't aware of the request.
No, they were aware of the request.
Oh, they were.
The DNC in general was aware of the request for it. I would imagine if the DNC was aware that Harris and Walz had to, or Harris at least had to be aware of what was going on.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be nice for her to issue an apology, because personally, I think one is warranted, because as far as I can tell, there was no legitimate reason not to let that person speak. So honestly, I don't know if she can undo the damage that I don't know if damage is the right word, but I don't know if there's really anything she can do to get the voters where Palestine is their central issue. I think the best she can do is heavily lean into things like women's rights, especially since the majority of female voters in swing states are pro Kamala. And man, it's tricky because I really have no idea if there's anything she can do that will have any positive impact on that issue, because I think any movement one way or the other is going to have both positive impacts on one side of the people that are going to vote for and negative impacts on the other side.
I think the only idea I have is if she strictly just hammers and hammers and hammers away populist economic policy. That's the
Yeah.
only thing that I think might give her a chance to save, because that's something that at least people would be like, you know, it sucks. I'm so mad that she's abandoning us on this issue, but I'll swallow my pride and still vote for her because at least she's willing to fight on these fronts. I think if
Yes.
she hammers that home, she still has a chance to win. And it's something that she has indicated that she's going to do more than other candidates in the past. But
Yeah.
we're in a case where a lot of things with this election cycle are very related to 1968 in many ways.
Oh,
And
yeah.
we I mean, we kind of in that case saw what happened soon after when it came to that. We had 8 years, or I want to say close to 8 years, when we had Nixon and Ford, which led to even worse things going on in the war in Vietnam. We
Yeah.
are in a case right now where, with the Trump presidency, as horrible as things are right now, since the Democrats aren't fighting to get out of this conflict, the Republicans could just make this conflict even worse, and it could lead to further destabilization in the Middle East and a lot more potential for boots on the ground, which would be catastrophic. I think that that's a thing too, is a lot of normie American people truly probably don't care about Palestine. But what they care about is either A, their tax money going towards countries that are not them, because we've seen, a lot of people want to care about America first, whether that's on the left or the right. Um, and I think a lot of people will start caring about foreign policy a lot more when it's our brothers and sisters that are going out there and having to fight these battles for other countries. And so the thing is, she has to be very smart about how she goes about that, because if she still truly wants to play neutral on this issue, she's at least going to have to be somewhat critical of Netanyahu and have to
Yeah.
lend some credibility to the other side. Because if she doesn't, she risks losing some swing states like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, which would ultimately lose her this election.
Yeah. Absolutely. And, one thing I think I would like people to realize that, particularly in this election, I don't think it's healthy to go into voting with the all or nothing mentality. Like, I think the thing that people need to keep in mind is baby steps. And normally, I mean, I don't want to sound dramatic, but particularly more so with this election than the first time Trump was elected, like, I think there are multiple implications that could be truly catastrophic if Trump got back into the White House. So I do wish the people on the left who like will refuse to vote for Kamala over Palestine will see the bigger picture. And then at the same time, I also wish Kamala and her strategists would also have the sense to nudge a little more on that. Like, at the very least, like, if you're not going to help them, can you at least not hurt them? You know, like, you don't have to announce full-fledged support for Palestine, but can you at least say, you know what, we'll stop sending weapons to Israel? Like, can that at least be something that you at least entertain? At least say that you'll entertain the idea of that,
Mhm.
even if it doesn't actually go through, because I have a feeling Congress would never let that happen anyway. But can you at least bring that idea up? It would go
Uh,
a long way.
yeah. The last thing I'll say on the front of third parties, because we could talk about, that as another thing for forever. But one thing ultimately that needs to change in this country that I'm sure me and you could definitely find common ground and agreement on is that a ranked choice voting system would be
Oh,
much better than the
yes.
electoral college, because A, it wouldn't screw over major parties in the respect that it does with the electoral college, but also it would allow third parties to get a much bigger voice and a much more support and a bigger, just more people with being able to view what their policies are than in the current political landscape we have today with
A
the electoral.
100%. I'm 100% on board with ranked choice voting.
Yeah.
I think that's the only way to realistically give third parties some real sway, and for a lot of the ideas that are just not necessarily progressive, but just new ideas in general, in order for them to really gain a hold in policymakers. I think that's going to be very necessary, because with ranked choice, I mean, you literally get to order them from most desirable to least desirable. So you basically, as a politician, will have to be for the things that the people are for in general if you want to have any kind of long-term career.
And I think ultimately it would lead to a much more engaged and just people that would pay more attention to the political process in this
Oh
country, I think,
yeah,
as well. So
because
yeah,
they'd actually feel like they have a voice.
right.
Like it's not just two parties just controlling everything.
Yeah. Well, hey, Dylan, this was fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on once again, and just everything. You've been great, and I know I've had you on now twice. I know I've got some shows down the line, but eventually at some point I'll definitely want to have you back on. Always appreciate it, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm always happy to come on.
Of course. Yeah. And for everybody who's tuned in, thank you so much. This has definitely been split into two parts by now. So the first part in economics, if you just watched, this is beforehand. And of course, this is part two here, talking about everything from Ticketmaster and Live Nation on. Appreciate everybody for tuning in once again to the Liberation Hour. Again, next week, I will give my prediction on the election, my what I like to call way too early 2024 prediction, as we still have some debates to go through and everything else. But appreciate everybody who's tuned in. Take care, everybody. Until next time, peace out.